The BS and Beer Show. Welcome. Tonight's topic is harnessing solar effectively and getting the most from your photovoltaic systems. Like I said, I'm Ben Bogey. I'm drinking a beer from Reverie Brewing in Connecticut. BS and Beer is an independent grassroots movement to share building science knowledge through local meetup groups. And this, our Zoom show. The Brew Crew and our guests volunteer our time each week to bring you what we hope is a fun and informative discussion. We'd like to thank Green Building Advisor and Fine Home Building Magazine for being our continued sponsors and help us bring this together on the back end to all of you every week. And with that, over to Travis.
Yeah, I'm Travis Braungart. I'm in Prairie Village, Kansas. I'm drinking a Sierra Nevada Wild Sour from a Stego Koozie. And I'm going to tell you about the general announcements. Of course, many of you have been on Zoom for a while now, so you know a lot of this stuff. You can find the chat box icon at the bottom of your screen. You'll want to be sure to click on all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your guests or see your questions and comments. Certainly that irritating thing on your mobile device where it always reverts back to panelists only will drive you crazy, but just click on all panelists and attendees every time you send something so we don't miss it. Fine Home Building sends out Zoom reminders each week. If you want to receive those as well as other information, you can join our mailing list at thebsnbeershow.com or check out the weekly post at Green Building Advisor that goes up on Sunday mornings. The video recording of tonight's show will be available at Green Building Advisor, and all past shows can be found on YouTube and through a link at thebsnbeershow.com. An audio-only version of the BS and Beer Show is available on Spotify as well as Apple Podcasts. And with that, we've got a couple of links that we'll add to the chat box regarding FIASCon. FIASCon is the leading passive house conference for climate-specific zero-energy design, construction, and building science expertise, and it's scheduled for October 12th through 15th in Tarrytown, New York. There'll be a link in the chat for that. Also, NEHB's International Builders Show is February 8th through 10th in Orlando. The Brew Crew, that's us, will host a live BS and Beer show on the afternoon of each day of the show. So check it out, buildershow.com. With that, my good friend Emily.
Hey guys, Emily Mottram, architect here in Maine. I am sadly drinking water from the tap tonight.
Ooh. Ooh.
Well, you know, gluten-free beer is not easy to come by. So there's that. Anyway, I have the pleasure tonight of introducing our guests. So Will Field started in the renewable energy field as a solar installer and project manager before joining Revision Energy as a system design specialist in 2017. In his role, he helps homeowners achieve their energy transition goals. Will, something unique, interesting about you, something you want to add to your profile?
I love playing stringed instruments. I love my dog Chip. I'm drinking Rising Tide Main Island Trail Ale, just snappy, crisp, grasping onto summer, but even though we're thoroughly into fall.
Awesome. We also have Sam Brown, who joined the Clean Energy New Hampshire in 2021 to assist in creating a cleaner, more affordable, and more resilient energy system in the Granite State. Prior to that, he was a podcast host and radio journalist. During that time, he wrote stories about New England energy issues. Welcome, Sam. What are you drinking while your staff is putting together your
our conference?
I'm
drinking the Govna, which is from Concord Craft Brewing, which is literally downstairs from our new office. One of the many perks of now working on Main Street in Concord. And yeah, if anyone is interested, we're putting on a conference tomorrow. You can attend remotely, digitally, and it's going to be great, though very New Hampshire focused.
Very, very cool. And we have Joe Barry, a senior research fellow at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. He has experience across multiple PV technologies, as well as doing work in other energy technologies. So welcome, Joe. What are you drinking? Something fun about you?
I'm drinking Upslope, which is from a brewery here locally in Boulder, Colorado, which is where I call home. So, it's a craft lager. It's their craft lager. It's quite good.
Awesome. Very cool. So if you're in the chat box, introduce yourself so your friends all know you're here. Otherwise, Will, you're up to share your screen.
Sure. Thank you. I created a quick presentation. I'll try to burn right through it. Just sort of common challenges and things I deal with as a solar professional. So I'm kind of a neophyte with PowerPoint, but here we go.
We tend to try to include several layers of technical difficulties into our shows. So if for any reason you struggle with PowerPoint, I think I'm usually to blame and Emily usually fixes it.
And I'll sit here and try and look cute.
I do have been listed as eye candy in the show planning documents, and no one's ever changed it because it's true. Please proceed, Will. You're sharing now.
All righty. Well, hello. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Will. I grew up in Maine, and I started out as a rooftop installer in the solar industry. Right now, I work in sales and design for Revision Energy, which is a 100% employee-owned solar company that was founded in Belfast, Maine in 2003. And now we've installed about 10,000 plus projects in 3 states. And right now we have about 300 co-owners, and we're constantly growing and hiring. Our vehicles say that. So if you know anybody who wants to join the team in the northern New England area, send them our way. And I wanted to focus on, what I know tonight. I think there's a lot of great resources on why solar energy is a good thing. And there's a lot of urgency. And I thought last week's episode is just fabulous. And shout out to Dr. Foley. But I wanted to tackle instead of the why, sort of the how of solar energy, which is what we do every day. And people love lists. So here's a list. So here's 10 tips for a smooth solar installation. I've visited hundreds of homes in mid-coast Maine and southern Maine, northern Maine, down east Maine. And I like to help educate and design, and we create a plan for homeowners to get off fossil fuels. And a lot of times it happens in stages, or it happens over a long period of time. I also work with a lot of builders, designers on new construction projects, and I know there's a lot of those in this audience, so I wanted to share sort of common things that I share with them. So the goal being that you know what questions to ask, what to look for, good practices and common challenges. So I'll back up really quick. So in order to talk the talk, I got to walk the walk. So here's my abode. It's a late 1800s colonial in Belfast. That's Allison, my partner. When we first got it last November, we had 2 heat pumps installed by my co-owners. Just a really simple setup, one upstairs, one downstairs, and that's all we used for heat last year. It was comfortable in a very old house. This year we have a wood stove, so we will not be as cold. And we also have 27 solar modules on our roof. We utilize the space that was there, and it cranks out energy. And this is what I see every day. I can view this. These are screenshots from my desktop monitoring portal for my solar energy system. You can also see it on your app. And it's really awesome to see clean energy created in real time. So as you can see, direct your eyes to the lower left. You can see red. That's what I'm drawing in from the grid at night. This is midnight to midnight. And then the solar energy system wakes up in the morning and then goes to bed at night, and it follows the weather patterns. The blue represents energy that I create, or energy that I use, and it's solar powered in real time. So at peak production, I'm exporting about 7 times what I need. And the way it works in Maine and in a lot of states, I am credited for that exported energy, and it offsets the red, which is the energy that I drew in.
Are we allowed to jump in and ask questions in the middle, or is that rude?
Go ahead, but I'll go over time, but that's on you.
So here's my Solar Edge app. I also have an array. I was pointing out that my utility grade production meter is there in the background that allows me to produce renewable energy credits. I want to know what it takes to get that nifty blue line down at the bottom that tells you when you're self-consuming versus when you're not. Because I don't have that.
Sure, it's a bell and whistle. It's about the size of a deck of cards, I'd say. It's a clamp. It's technically called consumption monitoring, and you clamp it right to the main lines that feed your house, and it just tells you up, down. This is a Solar Edge. That's just the brand of equipment that I have. It's an integrated product, so I can see it overlaid with my solar energy production. There are also third-party companies that do this. One that comes to mind is a Sense Monitor. And I think it's a really cool functionality. I think the key to reducing one's usage habits is transparency. I think that's true in a lot of usage, whether it be at water or lights or any number of things. Does that make sense? Great. So long story short, I create 2/3 of my energy between May and October. And then that balance carries forward throughout the winter. That's how net metering works. So a quick distinction. I wanted to point out the differences between off-grid and grid-tied, which is what I've been talking about so far. And then the third one, which is an offshoot, which is grid-tied with a battery backup. And I'll reference that throughout the rest of the slides. Off-grid is, we see a lot of those in Maine, islands, mountains. We did a project for the Park Service. It can make sense if grid access is prohibitive, if it has to run up a mountain and over a valley, it can, getting grid access can be difficult. And it requires a lot of lifestyle sacrifices. You have to make careful choices of what the system does and what it does not do. And there's a lot, usually in these systems, there's a lot of gas power to supplement. You might have gas heat or wood heat, a gas fridge, gas lanterns, any number of ways to sort of offload the weight from your battery system. And you kind of have to design the system in reverse. In other words, you need to make sure your solar energy creates, energy in the darkest months of the year. And you need a battery bank big enough to carry you through those lulls. It's not uncommon in Maine specifically to see 2-3 days with, very, very minimal solar production. So that's off-grid. Most, if not all, of what we do as a company is grid-tied work. It just means you have a physical connection to the grid. It'll export, you can import. You never really have to alter your lifestyle or worry about having energy because it's always there. And then the last one is just kind of an offshoot, kind of a combination of the two, kind of the best of both worlds. You store solar energy, and when the local power goes out, you have some solar energy stored to run some or all of your house. So just quick nomenclature and sort of what we do and what we focus on as a company. So number one, my first rule, keep the solar site simple and clear. A simple roof is the best roof. Things like vent stacks, chimneys, skylights, try to put those on the north side when you're designing your home. But if you can't, or if they're already there, we can work around it. It just presents a challenge, more time, more money, usually for an installation. Keep it simple. As sort of an offshoot, 1B, I'd like to give a shout out to these customers of mine in Midcoast Maine who, if their roof was prohibitive for a solar project, they created a roof. If you build it, we will come. This is a shed, an awning, or a pergola. And if you don't have a roof, you can use viable ground space. That's a really, really common way of harvesting solar energy. Number two, run a pipe through it. The energy you create from your roof or from your solar site needs to physically travel from your roof down to your utility closet to your electric panel. So some simple and relatively inexpensive things, there are things that you can do to make this easier for when you build the home of your dreams. And then when, a couple of years later, you want to do a solar array, you've already done a big chunk of the work. And it's physically just a pipe that can carry wires down to the utility closet. You can save work, you can save, and you can save the visibility. You don't have to see equipment retrofitted on the side of your home.
Can you recommend a minimum diameter for that pipe?
1-inch metal. That's a common one we've seen. This one in the lower left, that's 1.5 PVC. It's required by code. I'm not a code expert or an electrician, but if you have PVC and it's big enough, you can just sleeve flexible metallic wires through it. So it can be used if it's big enough. So 1.5 metal, 1.5 PVC.
So a quick point on that. When we built our house, we were told it depends on the type of inverter that you install. So microinverters on the roof versus an inverter in the basement has different requirements. And so metal preserves your options essentially, and making it bigger preserves your options. And so we oversized ours. We did 1-inch metal. And the idea was there's still space on our roof. We're generating 40% more solar than we need. But there's still space on a roof if we want to expand. And actually what we're doing right now is we're talking to a neighbor about what's called group net metering, so they could share on our solar array. And so we could expand our array, run another wire down through that conduit, and there's still space, and we'd still be up to code because it's 1-inch metal. Sorry to interrupt. Bye.
That's awesome. Sorry, were you going to say something? Yeah, that's awesome. And if there is physically more space on the roof, like it sounds like there was or is on your roof, if we can, just run a tape measure and say, wow, you're putting in 16 and you can fit 32. A lot of times they might run the wires ahead of time, just and be ready for another string of inverters. So good point. Number 3, energy stuff needs space and access. And this is another surprisingly simple one. It could be a challenge finding locations for solar equipment, especially in high performance net zero homes, stuff you guys know all about. A lot of times they have no basement. So you might be in a laundry room and the client wants, solar and batteries and sort of the works. We got to find wall space for it. And between solar components, generator components, electrical boxes, meters, battery equipment, just the physical space will add up quickly. So the best thing you can do is keep everything consolidated and within reasonable reach of each other. And it can be a challenge. I see a lot of high performance new builds, and I also see a lot of retrofits in old main homes. And in old main homes, you might have every generation added on a piece of the building. So it can get complicated fairly quickly. But energy stuff needs space and access, and there's always a way. But if you could make it easy, make it easy. Number 4, generators. They're very common in Maine, both new and old homes. The clients have goals of backup power, and they might invest in a solar energy system, and that's great, but they might forego the batteries. They might have an existing generator, or they just might build it into the new home. As long as they are downstream of the solar energy system, you're in good shape, and both energy systems can do their jobs effectively and safely. The solar array will be working for a large portion of the time. All the time you don't have power, you do have power, and the generator will safely kick on and do its job when you don't have power. So as long as you tie it in downstream, you're in good shape. Number 5, think ahead for batteries. Generators are a gas guzzling engine that sits and needs to be fixed, and it's loud and it needs gas infrastructure. And we approach every installation as not an if, but a when. When this technology will be obsolete and when it will be at cost parity with generator systems. And really, there are several design choices that can be made, but space and space for equipment is a big one. Number 6, be ready to shut the system off, because code enforcement rules are evolving. Code enforcement rules, they keep everyone safe. You, me, homeowners, first responders, when they need to service your home if it's on fire. And you need a way, and this is relatively new, and it's provided some hiccup recently, you need a way of shutting, a layperson needs to be able to see what the system and turn it off. So in this picture, you see a meter, you see a solar energy shut off. That's the conduit, that's the DC shut off that's coming from the roof and then continuing on to the inverter. And then you also have a battery shut off. The concept is, if you were to shut off the main power to the house, the battery would do its job. It would still provide energy to the home. So you need a way of shutting both systems off. So be ready to meet an evolving code compliance. So I wanted to point out a common theme is, proximity and space are big ones, because this particular example is just right above the basement, right above the utility closet. Number 7, mind the transformer. So every grid-tied installation goes through a tech screening during the permitting process with the utility. And sometimes if you have big solar and a small rural transformer, it can prompt an upgrade if the backfeed is too big. And I'm not going to make, we have an old grid and we're kind of asking it to do a new thing now. You're instead of power plants being centralized, they're now decentralized. So we're upgrading our grid, and this is something that the homeowner can sometimes pay for. And sometimes I can physically look at the transformer and spot this, a mile away, during the design process. Sometimes we can downsize the equipment to avoid this cost, but sometimes you can't, and sometimes it just catches you off guard. But think about the transformer. Number 8, an internet connection is important. Monitoring, like I showed you before, is very important for solar arrays. And most of our installations have some form of connectivity. And if the homeowner doesn't want to pay for internet service to a given site, there are cellular options that are getting easier and more cost effective. And homeowners love this stuff. They love, my parents used to show off their monitoring at cocktail parties, and it's kind of fun for people. I'd say they definitely go through a honeymoon phase with it. But then again, it sort of eventually goes by the wayside, and you might forget about it for a while. But it's also essential on our end, on a contractor's end, to service and diagnose and troubleshoot systems if we need to. Number 9, solar expansions can be elegant. Life happens, people move back home, homes expand. A 2-person house might become a 4-person house over a couple of years. And with our trend of beneficial electrification, getting off fossil fuels by means of electrifying things, needs stack up. A really common one I see is electric vehicles. Somebody gets an electric vehicle, and all of a sudden, what was net zero is now 80% or 75%. They might see an electric bill seasonally. If you have more roof, great. Sam, we talked about expansions earlier. I think that's awesome. That's foresight, that's planning. Wire sizing is a big one. Pipe sizing is a big one. Inverter sizing is a big one. Just there are ways, physically putting the leads at the end of a row so you can just plug more modules in. There are a lot of ways to sort of make your life easier. It's not, the reality is it's not quite as cost effective as doing it all at once. There's another round of design, permitting, installation, truck roll. And sometimes you can use the existing equipment, and other times you can just run another system in parallel. I've done both ways. So it can be done with planning. And number 10, this is sort of my Hail Mary pass to everybody sort of thinking about solar energy. Don't wait. Now is as good a time as ever to invest in solar energy, and the returns they will pay for itself over, several times over the multi-generational life of the equipment. More often than not, people wish they had done more earlier. It's just a common thing to, especially in new construction projects. I've seen that a lot in the last year. A project goes over budget in the estimating phase, and they're looking for corners to cut. And I would strongly encourage people to, leave this one in the project as there's a very quantifiable return, and there's a very quantifiable drop in operating costs and regional pollution reduction. And the last one is, the technology is here. We don't have to burn gas tanks on gas tanks of oil. You don't have to see the fuel truck coming into your driveway periodically. The technology is here to implement for homes to get off of fossil fuels. And this one is sort of a shout out to John Foley and the last episode, but I really like the simple elegance of this visual. The idea that things are trending up, but we can bend the curve. We can help reverse the direction. And the solar is a huge, huge, huge resource for energy harvesting, and we are just getting started. So that's my deck. So appreciate you all for listening to me and chiming in.
You got to love someone who casts a vision and leaves it with hope. That's a nice way to leave it. It's an excellent period on the sentence. We do a lot of gloom and doom around here, not specifically this show, but just, in the building community. And as a rule, there's a lot of hopelessness surrounding climate change. So doing our part, and especially with something as simple as adding free energy to your home plans, it's kind of a big win. So thanks for that. Excellent presentation.
My pleasure.
Agreed. Excellent presentation and lots of questions that came up. So kind of not specifically about what you had, but just like people talking in the chat and having questions. And Sam was answering some of them as they came up, but I think for the recording, it would be nice to have them on here and to do even more than that. So since you left it in a plan of hope, I actually like to go all the way to Joe and say, so Joe, you work in kind of the cutting edge of solar technology. What's coming that we should be aware of? So Will really shared what we're doing, how we're doing it. What's coming?
Well, I'm gonna start off by saying that I think Will really got it right. The technologies are here, right? There are technologies you can deploy right away, right now. And if you're in a position to be able to deploy it, you should, right? There's no reason to wait. So most of the stuff that we work on at the National Renewable Energy Lab, are kind of like any other technology, right? Our cell phones are way better than they used to be. Our computers are way better than they used to be. And so we're working on technologies that really can help us maybe give some additional optimism to, these questions around climate change. If you look at what the new US Department of Energy kind of goals are for a generation, right? It turns out it will take new technologies to hit those goals, but those goals are very, very ambitious and really targeted at turning around kind of climate change considerations. So we work on everything at the National Renewable Energy Lab. There's actually a building systems group, where they look at retrofit across all different types of energy technologies, for example. I personally work on basically the PV technology that's the part that's really generating the electricity. But obviously, right, I think Will's presentation also did a really nice job, right? You got to have the whole package. It's not enough to have solar cells. You don't have inverters and you don't have all the other infrastructure. So there are active projects on those topics as well, because it turns out, for example, inverters used to be one of the things that would limit essentially your performance over time for the systems. It wasn't actually the cells. Inverter failures were a big deal. Those are things that work at the lab has helped kind of address. But you asked what I do personally. So we work on technologies that are really designed to drive the costs down another kind of, we're hoping for orders of magnitude kind of change, right? And that means that it becomes economically a lot more accessible. Or, for example, the same amount of roof space can generate, say 30-40% more power, right? Those are the kind of changes that we're looking at. And it turns out a lot of it is about the details of both how you put together a module, but also what you're doing at the cell level, which is, the bits and pieces in the module, right? The materials. we look at, and how we manufacture those at a scale and speed that again allows costs to go down. So that's, I don't know if that kind of answered your question, but that's kind of what my day job is. And there are a lot of technologies that are kind of coming through it at the moment. I certainly would argue that the thing that, you know, myself and my team do is the most interesting thing, which is perovskite solar cells, which are a technology that was not around when I started at the lab some 15 years ago. But
what about things like thin film or like translucent solars? Is that something that's like realistically coming or going to be a viable portion of the industry? Or
well, it turns out, right? So certainly, I'm a big proponent, and Sam knows this from our previous engagement. I'm a big proponent of thin film, and it turns out if you look at the U.S. market, right? First Solar, who makes CadTel, they've mainly done utility scale systems. I believe they're starting to do residential systems. They are a thin film manufacturer, and there are a lot of reasons to like that from an overall sustainability perspective. Again, if you can get a system on your roof now, I'm not going to tell you not to do it because you should, right? But if you're looking at kind of where the field is headed, it turns out from a purely technical perspective, silicon is not the ideal material to do the job that it's doing. But, you know, this whole conversation is enabled by silicon, right? Silicon microelectronics. And we know a lot about it. And as this group, I'm sure can relate, right? If you have the perfect hammer, right, then every problem becomes a nail, you know? And so that's kind of how silicon is from a semiconductor perspective. But if you really look at kind of what you want to do in the solar task, right, at a material level, there are much better choices out there like thin film. And First Solar does a really, really great job at that. And those kind of technologies, I think, will become more and more pervasive. And the next generation of technologies that I work on, for example, are thin films that can be combined with incumbent technologies like silicon to improve their overall performance, or combined with other thin films to, again, kind of boost up the performance of those systems at the module and cell level. Did that answer your question?
I think so, yeah. I guess one of the questions is, you know, I'm a carpenter, project manager, home builder here, so a lot of the technology is very kind of ephemeral to me. What are, for us, practical benefits of things like thin film, like smaller panels, lighter, better fitting to the building?
So at the moment, the main advantage for thin film really comes at kind of utility scale, right? It turns out that in thin film, they're still essentially glass-based, which is basically the bulk of the mass. And because of production considerations, just like a lot of other technologies, making it bigger makes it more cost-effective. That said, if you look at kind of some of the technologies that are beginning to come through the pipe, things like organic photovoltaics and perovskites, there are concepts where those are much more kind of concepts where you can fabricate those on demand, in which case, you know, with existing utility scale, that's kind of the form factor you get. And as Will pointed out, right, you really want to keep it simple. But if you can really use advanced manufacturing and additive manufacturing, we can make these materials with print technologies, essentially. Now, all of a sudden, you could imagine doing an installation where, you know, all of the different panels are sized appropriately to the site that you're considering. And those are made
rapidly scalable, attainable. Yeah.
Well, those would be bespoken, right? You know, we have this vision, and to be fair, right, these are very much kind of cutting, bleeding edge things, right? But we have aspirations that you would go into, say, your local purveyor of solar panels. You'd work out the plan for what the roof looks like. You know, you come back the next day, and all those panels would be made, and you could essentially put them out. You know, the fact that there are thin films, there are also opportunities to lightweight things. We do some work with people like the Department of Defense, where kind of lightness is at a premium, but that also goes to building systems. Another aspect that we're looking at pretty actively are things like direct building integrated PV. So having, say, a replacement window where you have, now those won't be the most efficient PV systems, but you could imagine essentially powering a smart window product directly with an integrated PV system that's semi-transparent, essentially. And we have active projects on these kind of things that some of my colleagues work on.
I think that brings up a good question that seems to be kind of popping up. I see in the chat box too, which is about like the Tesla roof and CertainTeed roof and building it into our building products. Like you just talked about doing it with the window and it being semi-transparent. And, so I think technologies like that are coming. What I worry about is, with the Tesla roof, if it's glass and it lasts 100 years, but the PV technology only works for 25, 30 years, right? Like at what point does our building material outlive the technology that we have? And personally, as the architect in the group here, representing all the designers, people need to just get over it. PV panels are not ugly. They're a beautiful thing. If I pull up to a house with a PV panel on it, it's like, yeah. And I'm a designer. So that's really
I'm skipping that Greek cornice and pediment over the door. Like I don't even care anymore. I just see the panels.
I want to just jump in on the idea that solar panels only last 25 to 30 years. So we have a local reporter who's this like craggly old dude, Dave Brooks, similar name to a nationally important reporter, but not the same guy. Dave recently went on a hunt for the oldest solar panel in New Hampshire, and he found the one that, until someone comes up with a better one, he's got it. And it was installed in 1976 on an off-grid camp, and it is still producing electricity out there. So they lose efficiency, but at that point, that's a fully depreciated asset, right? That thing is sitting up there. It's paid for itself many times over, and it's still producing energy. So why would you take it down? And I would argue that if you got a roof that lasts 100 years, yeah, like you might lose some efficiency, but why would you put up a new one just because it's lost a little bit of its production, unless there's something that's radically better and going to pay for itself. And that's why, so Joe and I got to go on Science Friday together, and it was really fun. And we had a bit of a back and forth because one of my beefs is when you look at this bleeding edge technology that's out there, some people use the fact that there's better technology coming as an excuse to not act today. And my personal story, so I was really tickled to get invited because this house, we built it in 2015. It was based on the Pretty Good House concept. And yeah, so for those who don't know, these folks have a concept. It's called the Pretty Good House. It's a really great idea. It's basically like, forget all the fancy certifications and leads, whatever, passive house, just build a house that's as cost effective as possible. This cost us $250K to build it. And it's great. And we, I have not had to light up my wood stove yet because it even in New Hampshire, it stays very warm all year round. We have heat pumps and we burn wood. We burnt a cord of wood to keep it at like 75 degrees all winter. So anyway, the last thing the point I was getting at is that folks see about these technologies that are on the horizon, and they say, oh, well, I'll just wait for that. We installed our solar panels. We self-installed them. After tax credits and a state rebate, it was $2,000 worth of equipment, and we have zero utility bills in this house. It's an all electric house, very well insulated, and we pay $16 a month for all of our energy, right? So it's true. There's better technology coming. I am psyched that there are people like Joe in the world working to make that better technology come. And when I read, there's a book called Taming the Sun by a gentleman named Varun Sivaram. I'm probably getting his name wrong. That's about all of this new stuff that's coming on the horizon. And the idea of like, we're going to be able to print solar cells, and it's going to be so cheap that you're going to be able to build it into any material you want. All of that's incredibly exciting. I can't wait for that to get here. But also, we got to hurry. And if you want to act now, it makes economic sense to act now.
I mean, if you can afford it, you should do it, right? And I think, Sam just kind of indicated, right? There are certainly regulatory considerations that can help drive some of those things. Like, I once got asked by my, one of my program managers, right? His statement was, well, you guys are supposed to save the world. Well, no, right? We are there to develop technologies that give people options about how to make, decisions about transitioning energy sources, right? We're here to basically make technologies that make that easier, right? Whatever the constraint might be, right? We're here to basically help eliminate those constraints and increase the amount of energy generation that we can do. So there's, as we say, the future is now, so to speak, right? There are But thin film technologies, for example, getting back to the thing, it turns out like I believe like if you look at the U.S. market, something like 40% of the market is actually thin film. It's just that it's not necessarily in residential. It's in essentially grid scale utility.
I was flying to Kansas City and had a layover in Charlotte last week. And one thing I noticed is here in the Northeast, I see a lot of solar on large commercial buildings. But as I fly outside of the Northeast, not so much. What can we do to make that better? Is that a thing that's rapidly growing in other areas of the country? Is that a misjudgment on my side?
Can I hop on? So I'm the policy guy. So Clean Energy New Hampshire, which is the organization that I recently got brought on to lead, is a state policy advocacy organization. And for everybody here, I don't know where your audience comes from. A huge portion of the policies that govern whether or not this makes sense to do in your home, those policies are set at the state level, and sometimes at the regional level, but very frequently at the state level. And one of the things that I popped into the chat here is that if you're sort of stewing in climate angst, this is a really important locus of action, because state level policy is much easier to influence than federal level policy. Federal policies, they work on their own timeframes, and they're sort of governed by God knows what. State level policies, you can call your local rep. Here in New Hampshire, we have a citizen legislature. They get paid $100 a year. They are just volunteers, and you can call them up and they will pick up their phone and they will talk to you. Right. So if you're concerned about this stuff, a lot of those policies are dictated locally. So just recently here in New Hampshire, we cut the ribbon on the largest roof mounted solar array. Actually, Revision installed it. Shout out to Will. It was a 1 megawatt array on the top of the New Hampshire Associated Grocers, which, by the way, another cooperatively owned company, employee owned company. It's a 1 megawatt array because that's what the state cutoff for net metering is. It's not because there wasn't more space. It's not because, it's a relatively arbitrary policy distinction that was just set by some lawmakers, because they're like, where are we going to put it? We'll put it at a megawatt. Boom, done. I'm sort of on a a kick here where it's just like, we should be asking the market and trying to expose the market to a lot more of the effects of this renewable energy integration, as opposed to sitting on the sort of somewhat arbitrary policy distinctions we've made. So just to draw this out for a second. So Will said, put your mechanicals on the north side of your roof. And the reason for that is because you put your solar panels on the south side of the roof, because we're in the northern hemisphere and the sun swivels in the southern sky up here in the northern hemisphere. But the reason that we want panels on the southern roof in the northern hemisphere is because that's how you maximize production. It's how you maximize the number of kilowatt hours that roof produces. But if you want to maximize the value of those kilowatt hours and produce them at the time of day that's most valuable to the grid, you'd put them on the west roof, because the west facing roof means you catch the afternoon sun, which is when the peak demand is. And that's when the grid really struggles. And so I go on this rant really just to highlight the importance of policy. And that if we want to get this right, if we want to make the clean energy transition easier on ourselves, we need to get the policies right. And a lot of that happens at the state level, which is good news because you can get involved.
I mean, the other thing I would just kind of follow on to that, right? I mean, the siting consideration for kind of, this is why some of the big advances at utility scale relate to tracking, right? Just putting a single axis tracker on a system really changes the energy production of the same panels because of the way they're facing. And, again, there are some materials that are a little bit better than others in terms of basically what kind of angles they'll accept and produce power at. But, those are kind of around the edges. They're also, but making, say, a single axis tracking system, if you have the ability to basically site off the roof, if you have, land, I mean, that will substantially improve your essentially power production.
One of the things that we often hear though with that, Joe, is that the tracking hardware itself is almost cost prohibitive. Do you guys see and experience that there is enough of an efficiency gain to kind of offset some of the additional cost of the trackers? Or
so clearly at utility scale there is, right? And so this is one of those things where there are other technologies actually that, Sam highlighted a number of these when we talked on Science Friday, like bifacial systems as well, right? So this is where you have something that can harvest from the backside as well. Those kinds of systems, it's one of those things where a lot of the technology that we have for the rooftop, right, has leveraged what has been developed at utility scale. And as those prices come down, they become more accessible, and then you can begin thinking about, homeowners can think about them in different ways. So it could very well be dependent upon what exactly your goals are with your install. But certainly looking at active tracking and dropping the price of that is something that I know I have colleagues that look at and work on.
we have a project coming up right now where the house siting is not advantageous for solar, but the client is very adamant on doing production. So we have 6 acres of land directly behind the house with southern exposure. So
I got to admit, I'm the person who doesn't have a PV system because I got big oak trees and I live in Boulder.
That's a great thing though.
Yeah.
Because it came up, it came up a lot, and hopefully we'll at some point get to talk about, the cost effectiveness on like how to do it and whatever. But also like, so say your house doesn't face the right direction, or you've got big trees, or, like Sam said, west is great. Like, so maybe you take advantage of that. But I know there's also community solar projects and all of that. Well, I know Revision does a bunch of community solar projects. So are there ways for people who can't do roof mounted system, or maybe don't have a yard for a roof tracking? Like, what are the other options? And does it make sense for people to buy into community solar?
I'm going to defer that to Sam. Yeah.
I was gonna let Will go first, but I am happy to jump in again.
Oh, sorry, Will. Sorry.
No.
Hot potato.
I've for Will for a while. I feel bad.
We do. I have stage fright. New kid in the block. I would answer that in 3 ways. Number 1, east-west facing roofs absolutely work. If you Google Bar Harbor Public Works building, that's a PPA. It's a power purchase agreement. So you have investors and the town is an off-taker. It's a way for entities without a tax liability to go solar. If you Google that particular building, Bar Harbor Public Works building, it's a almost perfectly east and west facing array in Mount Desert Island, Maine. So I would not rule out an east-west facing roof if you have one. If you have sun, you're in good shape. That leads me to the second one, which is trees. That not a magic cure there. What somebody in the last episode said, magic bullet versus magic buckshot. I thought, or silver bullet versus. Anyways, I digress. But community solar options, there are kind of 2 big tiers of that, and we offer one in particular, which is basically, you share, kind of like your future roof, Sam. You share in the construction of a project with about 200 other people. It's between 200 and 300 other people. The one we completed most recently was at a dairy farm. We've done about a dozen in the state. And again, I love tangents. Maine state policy in 2019 increased the number of people who could share in a shared solar asset from 9 to infinity. As many people who wanted to join could do so. And that meant that, a lot of people could join in a solar array, and also a town could offset more than 9 of its meters. It could offset 100 of its meters. So community solar, you have ownership option, which is a great option. It's usually a little bit more cost competitive, at least in my region, than putting it on your roof. You have economies of scale working with you. And then there's the second option, which is subscription solar, community solar, which is that's been a kind of controversial one. First off, because everybody in the state of Maine has gotten, between 6 and a dozen mailers in your mailbox. They just blanket market it. And the concept there is that somebody else owns the array and you sign up for no upfront cost. And you might see like a 15 to 10% reduction in your operating cost in your solar bill. But you can say you're 100% solar powered. Somebody else owns the site. Somebody else claims the tax credit, and their cash flow is, your utility bill to this central site. I think that's a great option. You can have people, there's no reason to not do that. You sign up and you see your bills drop slightly and you can take advantage of solar energy. That was a lot of me talking. Does that all make sense? Is that any?
And I'll just pop in to say again, I'm a broken record here, but a lot of that's going to vary state by state. So Maine, it's funny, New England, there was a tweet recently. I apologize for talking about Twitter, but there was a tweet recently that was talking about the different ISO independent system operators, which are sort of like the air traffic controllers for the grid. And they were like comparing each of them to a Lord of the Rings character. And the New England ISO was compared to the Ents because it's like we move slowly, but we all march off to defeat Saruman. And that's kind of true, except Maine for a long time was the laggard. They had Governor Paul LePage. He was very antagonistic to renewable energy. And then things sort of like flipped on their nose when Governor Mills was elected. And it went from sort of like the coolest renewables market in New England to the hottest overnight almost. They passed this huge bevy of this huge sort of like omnibus of bills that encouraged solar, including one that encouraged community solar. Here in New Hampshire, so net metering. So we've sort of talked around net metering a little bit, and I'm just going to lay it out that net metering is when your meter runs backwards when you're exporting onto the grid, and it runs forwards when you're drawing energy off the grid, and it's a one-to-one exchange in classic net metering. And as a fun side note, I actually found the first, when I was a reporter, I found the first net metered building in the country. It was a public housing development in Quincy, Massachusetts during the Carter administration. And the engineer connected the solar panels to the grid without permission. He just plugged them in, didn't tell anybody. And the president was supposed to like come for the building's opening. And so that's why he could get away with it, essentially, is that they were just like, just connect the thing. Who cares? Whatever. Anyway, so that's where net metering came from, is like, it just was the easiest way to do it. In New Hampshire, net metering, we're the only country in the world that does net metering. I would argue it's not a great policy. It's kind of a Band-Aid. I think we need to get to a policy that will support solar and its continued expansion, but makes a little more sense. In New Hampshire, utility rates are like 18 cents per kilowatt hour. If you net meter your electricity, the Public Utilities Commission recently gave it a haircut. You don't get the full 18 cents. You only get like 14 cents. And then if you group net meter, which is what we're talking about when we talk about community solar, which is you build a big installation somewhere and you share it between however many homes, maybe 200 homes, a group net metered installation might only get 8 cents per kilowatt hour. And I just lay all these numbers out really to say that it really is very specific to the state. So you need to do the research where you live to figure out what the community solar legislation is in your state, to figure out if it makes sense. And in a lot of states it does. Minnesota is the classic one. Massachusetts is very generous as well. But I cannot guarantee the folks on this call, especially I've seen some folks who appear to be from Europe, in which case I have no idea.
Connecticut fell on its face trying to do a pilot program with community solar.
Yeah, I mean, these local considerations are a big deal even at utility scale, right? So I live in Boulder, and the city basically vetted the notion of creating our own utility so that we could go green, and our main utility provider, Excel, didn't like the idea of losing those customers. And so, there was a lot of discussion, but they're looking to really up their amount of essentially renewables that they provide to their customers in our area as a result. So, these kind of engagements can really kind of matter if you're passionate about this stuff at all length scales, right?
thought Ben was in charge, but I'll still ask questions.
I can't be the only one to ask stupid
I'm
questions.
kidding.
Here. Come
Oh
on, hop in.
no, definitely not stupid questions. And I asked about community solar and all this stuff. But so getting back to that, like, what's the typical? So you talked about how it just like it makes sense to do community solar if it's available in your area. It's not available everywhere, but like, what's a typical return on investment? And I mean, I saw some people in the chat were saying 3 years. In New England. We often say 5 to 7. I think that again probably depends on the town you're located in and your energy provider and, doing the calculations. And then there was also, if you can rent them, okay, but it's better to buy and get a loan, but it's best to buy with cash. How do you guys provide the information to people who are thinking about it?
That's got to be for Will or Sam.
Because Joe's trying to make it more cost effective for all of you, but until he does,
I'm rooting for Joe so hard. I want my solar paint. I just want to paint my wall with solar. That's what I want.
Well, I did see in the chat a question about basically cooling, which I'm happy to address because that's a basic physics kind of concept. But I also saw a note about nerd alert, so I don't want to go there. Right. So.
I think that was in regard to the reference to dang it, Lord of the Rings. No. That's what that was.
Well, then that was justified.
I'm happy to be the nerd.
Totally.
Whatever.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll
wear that proudly.
I'll try that one. I wrote down 3 ideas as sort of things that can help solar energy adoption, and I just sort of came up with these. Feel free to say true or false or boo or whatever. Number 1 is trades education, as we need help. We're in mid-coast Maine. We need licensed electrical people. We need education systems to provide people with that skill set. Number 2 is good policy on all levels. Making permitting faster, making tax assessment friendlier. That's probably going to open up another can of worms.
Donate to your local policy nonprofit.
And
local policy nonprofit.
The 3rd is loans. Good competitive loans that allow people to avoid making a huge cash outlay in doing this project. And they do exist, but it's a competitive market. We personally, as one solar contractor in northern New England, we offer about a half dozen loan options. The concept is you can trade your utility payment for a principal payment that pays for your solar project. So you don't have to, common people building their house might do that. People getting ready to send their kids to college might use the loan product. You don't have to drop a big lump of cash. You can finance the project and it sort of pays for itself. You eliminate one payment, you supplant it with another payment.
I would just tag on with one of the big barriers, because a lot of these decisions are, again, made at a very local level, is code. And in particular, the federal government has a thing called Solar App Plus. And when you look at the cost for residential solar worldwide, the US has really high costs, and a big chunk of those costs comes from something called soft costs, which is permitting, interconnection, dealing with the local building inspector. So Solar App Plus is a program that the federal government had, where they basically said, here's the best practices. We made an app for you. You can just, your town can adopt these practices and it will cut those costs. So look it up. It's something that you can go to your select board and say, let's adopt this. Let's become one of these Solar App Plus communities, and you will cut costs for your local solar installer. It's funny. So the country that has been highlighted for being the one that has done the best on cutting these soft costs is Australia. And now residential solar in Australia is almost as cheap as utility scale solar, which is crazy. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. Here in the United States, it's almost 3 times as much for residential versus utility scale. And there are a couple, there are occasionally sort of horror stories there where there are really bad idea solar installations that have been put up. But I think that I only mention the horror stories just because you should do a little bit extra digging and sort of figure out how rare they are. One of the things that is going on here in New Hampshire is a lot of towns are requiring like an engineer's stamp to certify that the roof is strong enough to carry these solar panels. And I talked to an engineer who was working for one of the firms that provides these stamps, and he's like, oh yeah, I mean, we just like we've got some calculations, but it's basically like it's like 3 minutes of work for $500. It's just like another roof, good, stamp, boom, $500, please. And so a lot of these permitting hurdles are really unnecessary. And I think that we can find sort of the middle road that avoids the horror stories, but doesn't require, really unnecessary engineering work to be done.
Yeah, I just go back to the thing that Will said at the top, the need to basically train the right workforce, right? And indeed, how we work at developing the technology so it is more deployable, more readily, more easily. I mean, those are also critical pieces to really convince people that, a lot of these soft costs that Sam just talked about really can't, they're superfluous oftentimes.
Well, as long as we're going back to Will's original presentation, I'm going to go back to the hope at the end of the presentation, because I really think that this is a function of re-educating society at large. And I know that's a simple task, so I'll just knock it out real quick in a few sentences here. But we don't really spend a lot of time looking at payback on free trade organic coffee. People buy that crap because it's the right thing to do. So if the alternative is, let's go ahead and burn fossil fuels and pollute the environment more and ignore the free energy that we could have if we would just go ahead and do this thing, that we should just go ahead and do that. Like wear your seatbelt, put on your bike helmet, teach your kids to read, all of the good things that we're supposed to do. Let's just go ahead and do those good things. And that's easy for me to say. I realize that these things do have a cost. I'm not an idiot. I get that. I don't have solar on my house, but I also do have the tree problem. However, it would appear that if we can refocus that energy that goes into selling people on their payback period and sort of remind people what you already pointed out, which is that this thing, if you do this, it just keeps giving you back in almost indefinitely. Yes, there's a loss in efficiency every year. I can't run a 4-minute mile anymore. Damn it, I'm 44 and now I'm slow. But I can still get a lot of work done. So don't kill me off and put me out to pasture just yet. Let's go ahead and keep on moving. So I think that the education thing is huge for clients, of course, for tradespeople. That's a problem across our industry on almost every level. But in my area, almost all my electricity comes from a coal-fired power plant. So if I can make this transition to solar, it's a huge win. And I can be as enthusiastic as I want to be. I've had a total of 1 project get solar on it. It's almost always one of the first things to cut because you're like, well, energy is so cheap here. Let's just not worry about that. So I'm not doing any better than anyone else. I'm not calling anyone out. I'm just saying I want to refocus our efforts. I think that the energy put there is very well spent. How about let's talk about doing the right thing. Let's just do this because it's right and not worry about the fact that it costs more. Come on.
Well, I mean, I guess the one thing I push back on there is the notion of costing more, right? Because it's all about externalities. What is it we're paying for at the time that we're making the purchase, right? Because even in the context of existing PV systems, right? I want to say one of the first silicon modules that was made is still operational, right? It's older than me, but technology does advance. So one of the things we're really interested in as we think about new technologies is making sure that we have this kind of circular economy kind of concept where we're essentially defining a supply chain that doesn't require us to mine and get new materials, right? We can take the old stuff off, we can reconstitute it and reuse it, right? And that avoids these externalities that are costs that would be buried otherwise. And if you think about CO2 emission, that's an externality, right? Every time we burn fossil fuels, that's getting dumped into the atmosphere. Somebody's paying for it. We're all paying for it, right? And so you can't just kind of pretend that those things don't have costs, which is what we've kind of done for a long time.
Well, and so there's one thing that I wanted to piggyback on here, which is to say, you talked about the return on investment, but people cut it from their projects all the time. And one of the things I like to ask builders who are like, well, I don't know, about the return on investment on solar. It's like, what's the return on investment on like a kitchen? Well, like when you get your kitchen for $25,000, what's the ROI on that? And like, so the reason I bring that up is really a lot of these decisions are not made based on rational, like homo economicus calculations of ROI. They're made based on culture, and what we're waiting for is the culture shift. And the problem with waiting for the culture shift, in sort of like energy literature, there's this guy Vaclav Simil who talks about how long it took us to go from wood to coal and from coal to whatever oil, and he has pointed out that most energy transitions take about 50 years. And when I look out, I'm like, this energy transition is going to be inevitable because it already makes economic sense now, and we're really early in that transition, but we don't have 50 years. And so we can't wait for the culture. And so that's where we really need to push, and where the policy really needs to push, and why we need, why this needs to be more than just waiting for the that aircraft carrier of the culture to turn. Why we need policy, and we need a social movement, frankly, to be pushing people on this. And that's the thing. It's like this stuff makes, like, for the so I heard Mary Powell, who's the CEO of Sunrun, was on a podcast recently, and she was pointing out that 3% of residential homes that could have solar on the roof right now have it. 3%, and that's the 3% of the roofs that could have it economically have it. And so it just becomes clear, like, this right now these decisions aren't being made on an economic basis. They're being made based on just like, well, what did that guy do? He's my neighbor. He seems smart. It's going to take something.
Sorry, Sam. I read an interesting piece in the New York Times, for whatever that's worth, the other day, talking about how there's a lot of predictions that we're going to have exceptionally high energy costs coming this winter. And some of that's, geopolitical, some of it's weather dependent, some of it's, climate change dependent. And also some of it is due to the initiatives that we're taking on climate action right now. So there's two possible outcomes that they're thinking can come out of this. One is that people reactionarily recoil against some of the environmental stuff we're doing and go tisk tisk, this is why we're driving energy costs up. And the other side of it is a potential culture shift where people go, okay, we're at the point now where things are really getting out of hand. We really need to make a change. So I'm hoping that
do the right thing
goes. Yeah. My running tagline is try to suck less.
Yeah, that's fair.
A slightly less optimistic version, but fair.
Yeah, I think Christoph says do better things, not do things better. Do better things. There you go. That's suck less. Same difference.
What did John Foley last episode said? Tesla doesn't market its car as a greener car; it's a better car. It's faster. It's you can cruise right past a gas station.
That's my go-to. It's the future is cleaner, better, cheaper.
One of my international colleagues too, who works on these things, is, on the one hand, right, we've had solar technologies around for a long, long time, right, before I was born, like with these incumbent technologies. But at the same time, right, we're just at the point where we're deploying them at the size and a scale where we're learning important things about how they should really function, what they should really do, how we should integrate them into kind of how we live. And so, there is this transition opportunity, right? I mean, so I feel like that's coming, and certainly that's one of the things that gets a lot of us at the National Renewable Energy Lab up in the morning to and into work, so to speak.
So I want to put a point on this. So I recently, I love heat pumps. I have a heat pump in my house. I think there's a huge chunk of the market that could, we could retire a lot of furnaces by putting heat pumps into houses. They're not a perfect product though. I also got to give a presentation at one point, and a woman came up to me afterward where she said, so I'd like to install a heat pump. How do I? And then we started talking, and it turns out she has radiant hot water heating in her floor. And I was like, oh, well, it's not going to do that. And she's like, oh, I can't give that up. And so I bring this up just because there are innovations that are going to be needed, right? And it is true. Like, you can look at the people who run the models and they're like, we could run the entire world on renewable energy with today's technology, just do it. That might be true, but there are technologies that are going to come online that will make that much, much easier, because they're going to make it so that that woman can have her radiant hot water, floor heating. And so I think that, like, if you're in a position where you can do this stuff right now, if you're motivated, if you have the capital, if you have a building that can support it, go do it. The stuff is ready. It will probably pay for itself. If you're not, I think a lot of things will be coming online in the very near future that will make it possible. And the reason, there's a couple of reasons why I say that. One is that just that I get to talk to a lot of industry folks who are working on a lot of innovative products. But the other is just that there's so many brains right now that are focused singularly on this problem. And so don't despair. There's hope on the way.
Is this a deal where we need to get Joe Barry in Kim Kardashian's living room, and we need an influencer on somebody that, and I'm probably like 5 years behind the time. She probably doesn't matter anymore. But there's somebody out there that matters, that could influence. What's that?
Miley Cyrus, is she still relevant?
Oh, I wouldn't think so. I don't know. This is out of my area of expertise, Ben.
Come on, this is nerd
Clearly
hour.
mine too. Yeah, sorry.
None of us know the answer to this.
Yeah, no.
But you get my point. If we want to turn the ship, you can turn it pretty quickly if you reach a little younger, and maybe we lobby our government to every public school has to be run by solar by 2025, and then all those kids grow up with solar on the roof, and it's normal. It's just normalized, 100%, no weirdness. Just, oh yeah, we have a house, so we need to have solar, and then all of a sudden, all this stuff becomes very easy and simple, and costs continue to fall, and that boat turns a little quicker. Is that a thing? Are there people that, I don't know.
I mean, I think that goes back to the point you made about Tesla, right? I mean, the Tesla is cool, right? And that also feeds into this do the right thing and suck less kind of idea, right? I mean, I think it's pretty clear, right? Younger folks are very concerned about climate change. And I think that is going to make a difference, because, they're cognizant of it. They know that it's, they hear the stories from old folks like us. They know that things are different now in ways that are kind of disturbing. So,
I'm also disturbed by the youth of America. That's a
right?
nice admission.
Fair.
I'm being told that I'm an idiot about radiant floor heating and heat pumps. Apparently, it's not true.
No, you can do. There's air to water heat pumps. They're actually they're kind of a niche product, but they're growing.
I think forced hot water is probably where. But what I've heard from again folks who really know much more about the engineering than I do is that most air source heat pumps struggle to attain the temperatures necessary to do forced hot water. Is that not correct?
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Oh, great. See, this is what I mean. The products are on the market. Yeah.
So the only downside to that is climate change and air conditioning, but that's a different show.
I have a beef about that point. Which is that like cooling takes much less energy than heating. And for some reason whenever folks try to cool their space to a comfortable temperature, we sort of like wag our fingers at them puritanically. But here's the thing is that heat waves are a silent killer, right? So heat waves come. There was a heat wave in Europe in 2000. I'm gonna forget the date, but it killed thousands of people when they went back into the books, right? And so air conditioning is a life-saving improvement it's a life-saving climate adaptation that we are going to need as heat waves become more frequent. Yes, it's going to require using more energy, but it will save lives, and it is genuinely, it's a justice issue. So like.
I don't have anything. I don't have anything wrong with air conditioning. I meant air to water through radiant is difficult for air conditioning. Sorry, that came off.
Yeah. Sorry.
I think Emily's on record historically as saying she's anti-comfort in general.
I am anti-comfort. No, dehumidification. Maybe we still don't need air conditioning in Maine. We just need to handle the new moisture levels we've got. No, there's lots of stuff.
But air conditioning
that's like
causes
a
more people
whole
to-
show.
Air conditioning
like-
causes more people to die from heat waves than not using air conditioning because our bodies become acclimated to the air conditioning, and then when we get exposed to higher temperatures, we die at higher rates.
That
Well-
is also true. I've seen the studies.
Yeah,
that
yeah,
actually-
they're real. They're real. Yeah,
but it's
Then
also
we're going
it-
down a whole dark alley here.
But
Yeah,
I
so-
believe that's also like you're from a northern climate as opposed to like you live in air conditioning. I think people like in Arizona, whatever, we're lost. Here.
I'd have to go back and read through them, but yeah.
I'm sure the chat box is just yelling at us nonstop. So
Probably.
Full derail.
They deserve it.
Full derail.
I took that one right off the,
The best
jacks. All
ones do.
right.
It looks like Will's handling all the questions, and I'm just like staying out of this one, right? You know?
So speaking of controversial things, then let's talk batteries for a hot minute.
Ooh.
Please.
This wasn't supposed to be a show about batteries, and I will say that if it becomes a thing, we might do more shows about power outages. But it came up for we have people in our chat or here in our audience who have been in hurricane prone areas. So like, how do we deal with when the utility grid is down? We've got lots of northern climate people here. So how do we deal with when the utility grid is down? And batteries and battery storage, and then where they are. There was someone who was talking about policy and regulation in the town that they're in, having to have like a separate room for battery storage. We're hearing up here that they have to be in conditioned spaces. So now our options are in the utility room, where we worry about our 500-gallon sprinkler system tank, because got to have one of those now. Or finishing and insulating a garage, because that's a better location for it. But is it a better location? Now we got
And then
dirt.
you have to
and
put parking bollards in front of them. We're currently doing a project in New York State where we're under the guise of NFPA 855. New York and California are the only states adopting that, and it's been a bit of a hurdle bringing ourselves up to speed with what that entails when we start bringing batteries in. So,
yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I can talk to some of the. I don't do batteries professionally, but I do dabble, as they say, right? I mean, and if you think about kind of battery technology, a lot of what we're using at utility scale are derivatives of kind of the technology that we use in laptops and power tools, right? But if you think about kind of the requirements for those applications, they're very different than when you're talking about larger and larger systems getting towards grid scale. So there are other technologies, right? Like but it turns out for, load balancing, they do use the same technology, just they make them really, really big, or they have really, really large amounts of them. And I feel like that's something that will again change as we think about kind of the purpose that we have for basically storing at grid level, right? Or at the household level even, right? In the context of space constraints, things like lithium ion and say the Tesla system, as Will kind of pointed out, that could make a lot of sense. But eventually we'll be looking at systems that are a bit more purpose built. They may have larger form factors, but they may be something we can bury in the backyard and just kind of works for 50 years, right? So at least from the technology perspective, there's a lot of work going on in the battery space, but a lot of it's focused on kind of vehicles, right? Where weight and power to weight ratios are kind of an important consideration, or energy density to weight, right? But so that's my nerd moment. For
I
this.
wonder, Joe, do you know if there's an emissions benefit to us putting the effort into cars more so than it is into buildings? Or
I mean, there are clear reasons to do that. I mean, the other aspect is that if you look at, we kind of have talked around it, but curtailment, right? Issues where you have massive penetration on the grid, you start having overcapacity, and if you electrify your vehicle fleet, most of those cars are parked when your solar resource is generating a lot of energy. And so there's kind of, coupled benefits to electrification in that sense, right? Because you're taking away the fuel, plus you have this resource that you can take advantage of, right? Where you've got a lot of solar penetration. So it makes a lot of sense from that perspective. The other thing is that there are other storage options. Actually, this didn't make it on Science Friday, but we had a whole conversation about, turns out mechanical systems for like pumping water uphill are a very effective way of storing energy. Right. So if you have the right site, there are all kinds of really interesting options, and those systems can be quite efficient. So the storage, question is a tricky one, but there are a lot of options there. Especially, the storage that I need for my phone or my laptop is a very different kind of prospect than what I need for my house. And so I think that's something that is being looked at in a more kind of holistic way, if you will. I don't know if Will wants to comment though.
I just want to jump in.
Hold on, with 2 seconds. It was very telling for me looking at that NFPA 855 document, because there's sections in there for, it's all about energy storage systems. There's sections in there for flywheels and kinetic storage and stuff like that. There's nothing in those sections yet, but the sections are in the code documents.
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry, Will.
No,
sorry, Sam.
No.
Go on.
I was gonna say, so flywheels is really funny. Beacon. I can't remember if it's Beacon Energy or Beacon Power. They were a flywheel company based in Boston, and they had an installation in New York, and they actually wound up going bankrupt because they had a whole issue where they had a grid scale storage pilot project and one of the flywheels exploded. Right, the thing they're spinning super fast, and it's supposed to be like a sort of minimal or zero friction environment. It was like they pump out the air, it's spinning in a vacuum, and something went wrong and exploded. And they actually like came back from bankruptcy, and they like have sorted it all out. But the reason I bring it up, my general takeaway for folks, there are a lot of questions in the chat about specific chemistries and like what's happening. There is a ton going on in the storage space. There are dozens of chemistries that are being tried. Form Energy here in Boston has an iron air battery that they just announced has incredibly low kilowatt hour costs. And so I would say there's a lot in the air right now, and it will all sort itself out. And these questions about safety and what is safe and what isn't safe, those will get sorted out as we get more experience. But we really are at sort of a pivot point with storage. And there's a lot of balls in the air, and I think they will resolve themselves as we learn more, as things sort of come online down the road, and including, this is a point I talk about all the time. The renewable fuels could wind up being what we use for seasonal storage, right? And the reason that when you look at what's going on in renewable fuels land, and basically when I say renewable fuels, what I'm talking about is you use green energy to create hydrogen, and that can be turned into any number of things. Like ammonia is one that people point to as being very transportable. But there's a whole industry right now that is freaked out about the climate or the clean energy transition, and it's the natural gas industry. And that is an industry that's very motivated to figure out what its business model is going to be. And they've got a lot of pipelines that could move fuels that could be generated renewably. That the question is, will that be economical? And that is all to be determined. So I am a huge optimist in this space. I think we're going to figure this out, and I think that it's the reason why I left my cushy public radio job to get into advocacy, because we are at a pivot point, and it will happen.
As long as we're not burning natural gas to make hydrogen.
Well, I mean, that's what we're doing right now, right? That's a huge global industry right now that needs to be displaced. It'll be the first market for renewable hydrogen is displacing that stuff. An open question is, will renewable fuels beat heat pumps? And I think the answer to that is no. But I can tell you there are a lot of gas executives who think the answer is yes. And as long as they're doing it clean, I'm ready to wait and give them the space to try to figure it out.
I mean, one thing to keep in mind, right, is energy, right? I mean, this is one of the object lessons, right? You remember a few years ago when Samsung had all these phones catching fire in people's pockets, right? I mean, there's a lot of energy density there. And so storage is, the safety of storage, you're still storing the energy. So at a fundamental level, that energy is still there and it can still bite you. So, getting the technologies right to meet kind of the application needs is one of the critical things that's really got to be done. But yeah, I mean, I think that all these technologies for storage, I don't work on it because I feel like it's an easier problem. That's what I'm going to say. That's going to be my story, right? But because I think there are lots of options, right? There are batteries, there's pumped hydro, there's chemical storage into chemical bonds, right? So picking which one you want to do, I think really depends on exactly how it is you want to take advantage of that energy resource, right? How you're going to use it.
With Joe, these problems are too easy for me to solve. I'm going to focus on building houses.
Perfect.
we are kind of down to the end of the show, and I don't know if someone has a last question or final thoughts, but it's just very exciting to have you guys on with us tonight and working on this in your various arenas at the hands-on level, at the research level, at the inspirational level. I'd like to thank all of you before we run out of time. So please proceed with the show, but know that you have my gratitude.
No, thanks for the invitation. Really appreciate it. It's always good to highlight, all the good stuff that the folks at NREL do. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, ditto to what Travis said. For those of us out in the trenches building houses every day, we can get a little bit jaded to the world with what we see on a daily basis. So it's nice to come on with you guys and see that there is forward progress and hope for the future.
Yeah, and I just saw this in the chat. I will once again plug. The locus of action on this really can be local. So wherever it is that you are, figure out who's an effective operator locally. Don't get distracted by the national news. Don't get distracted by the national groups. Figure out who's doing the work where you are and support them.
You suggest going to like our state utility directives, or what are some good sources for people to find those things, Sam?
That's an excellent question, and unfortunately, I don't think that there's a shortcut of an answer.
I was afraid that was where we're going.
I mean, so what you should do is you should be hired as a reporter for your local public radio station. And you should spend 10 years figuring out the energy landscape in your state, and then you will know who's going to be most effective, and then you should support them.
Or you should just call Sam. It's like hashtag ask Mike.
We'll put his cell phone in the chat.
Call Sam. He knows everything.
Follow him on Twitter.
I do tweet quite a lot, unfortunately.
Yeah, no.
I think that's go ahead, Emily.
I was gonna say, I think it's great. I think what you said earlier is really, it's just a value change. There's no ROI on a kitchen. We do a bunch of new construction. Almost all of our new construction has solar on it. It's solar ready. If it doesn't, right, run in that conduit, it's ready for those solar panels to go on. And there's a couple rare instances where you get a property. I mean, it happens, right? You get a property that's got trees, or it's in town lot, or whatever. And so, it's been really awesome in Maine to see that climate shift and, have access to community solar or other opportunities. And, I know you said about the whole blanket mailer being sent out to the state of Maine, but man, they made it easy for people who didn't know to join in on that. I got a phone call from my father-in-law who's 75. He's like, "Is this a good thing to do?" And I'm like, "Yep." And like, that was the end of that conversation, and so in some ways that's it. But yeah, I appreciate everything that all of you guys do, technology, policy, installation. It's all so important. And, sharing it. I mean, doing the show like this and talking to people about solar and making them just go, okay, I'm going to try it. I don't have any solar on my roof yet, but that's because I need a new roof. And I saw someone said earlier about metal and do metal if you can. And, we're working our way through that, but we got heat pumps and an ERV this year. So and I have a Tesla.
So, this was what I was going to say. Someone asked about EVs. Transportation is now the biggest source of emissions in the country. It used to be electric power, but that's falling because generally generation's the low-hanging fruit, because all this stuff is cost effective already. Transportation is the next big thing, and it's another area I'm super excited about, because the manufacturers are finally on board because the technology is here.
Yeah, agreed.
A solid parting thought.
A great endpoint for our show. I want to thank all of you and thank our audience for coming with us tonight. It was another riveting discussion, and I'm hopeful for what the future holds.
Yeah.
Good night, everyone.
And I'm sorry that I'm dumb about heat pumps and forced hot water, everybody. Bye.